Let's get an update on what's happening on the ground. Journalist Hopewell Chin'ono joining us now, who's been observing very closely the situation on the ground. Hopewell, good to have you. Good evening.
Thank you for having me, Thabo.
Polling stations not open. Those that are opened late. Shortage of ballot papers. Some are leaving angry. Some are coming back. Some may not even come back. Very little communication. Is there, in your view, undisputable correlation between those kinds of events that we are seeing at voting stations, the delays, and the support base of either ZANU-PF or the CCC?
This election has been nothing but shambolic, an embarrassment to not only Zimbabwe, but to the region, because the international community is watching what's happening in Zimbabwe. People came to their polling stations, especially those in urban areas, in areas that are very close to the center of power, and they didn't have ballot papers, so they did not vote. Some people in urban areas, up to now as I'm speaking to you, have not started voting. And yet the Zimbabwe Election Commission was able to deliver ballot papers in ZANU-PF strongholds, which are 500 kilometers away from Harare. This shortage of ballot papers, or not having ballot papers at all, has happened mainly in the opposition strongholds of Harare and Bulawayo. The second aspect is that the ZANU-PF officials, working together with an underground secret service organization called FAS, have been putting desks around polling stations next to the polling station door and collecting names and ID numbers of people that are going in to vote, especially in rural areas. This is meant to intimidate people. They are being told that if you vote for the opposition, we will know because we have captured your ID number, we have captured your name, we know the sequence in terms of who went in first and who went after the first person and so forth. And so this, by any standard, remote standard, it's not a free, fair, and credible election. The third aspect is that a lot of citizens who live in urban areas, which are strongholds of the opposition, have been going to the polling stations and they've not found their names there. Some of them are even prominent members of civil society. They've gone there and they've not found their names there. So it has been a shambolic election, and it's one that is going to have a disputed election result, and when that happens, we know that it will be 5 years of back and forth fighting between the opposition and the ruling party, and it will have huge ramifications within the region.
What is compelling voting stations that opened late, that had a shortage of ballot papers, to close exactly at 7 p.m., like we are seeing in some voting stations in Harare?
Well, nothing really works when the politics of a country is not right. The region, and especially your viewers in South Africa, would know that things in Zimbabwe are not working properly. Zimbabwe is the sick man of the region. And so what's happening is choreographed. It's not that the Zimbabwe Election Commission is incompetent. That's not the case. They are very competent, but this is choreographed to create chaos, a chaotic environment that makes rigging conducive for the ruling party. It's not you can't imagine a situation where any election commission anywhere in Africa would fail to print ballot papers. The commission has come out and said that they failed to deliver ballot papers on time because of court cases. But the ballot papers that mostly, especially in urban areas where they failed to deliver ballot papers, are for local governance, that is councils, and yet there was no dispute, not even a single dispute on local governance candidature in the courts. It was about the presidential candidature of Xavier Kasukuwere, who's based in South Africa. It had nothing to do with local government. So one wonders why the Zimbabwe Election Commission would hide behind such a lame excuse when it knows very well that there was no disputes in courts regarding local government. But what I want to say is that South Africans who are listening and your leadership in South Africa should understand that if this election is disputed again, it's going to lead to millions of Zimbabweans coming to South Africa, both legally and illegally. As you know, 75% of women who give birth at Musina Hospital in Limpopo are from Zimbabwe. We've seen the MEC for Limpopo demonstrating against the huge influx of Zimbabweans using health delivery services in Limpopo and beyond. And this is not going to stop. South Africa is going into an election in 2024, and your leaders, including the Secretary General of the African National Congress, has characterized the opposition leader in Zimbabwe, Nelson Chamisa, as an American puppet, parroting the ZANU-PF propaganda. That does not help. This is a crisis that needs to be resolved with a clean election. And the fact that the region, SADC and South Africa are not willing to come to the table and make sure that a free election is delivered, we are going to see a huge influx of Zimbabweans going into regional countries, particularly South Africa and Namibia. Yeah. And that won't be good for the coexistence between South Africans, ordinary citizens who suffer and are told that your jobs are being taken by Zimbabweans.
So you are saying this is a strategic election manipulation process that you are seeing happening here, not necessarily that it's incompetence, because from some of the reports we know that, for example, for the presidential ballot, 7.1 million ballot papers were printed. There was a contingency there of about 7%. National ballot, also another 7 million printed. Local authority ballot papers, 6.8 million printed. All of these with contingency. So there should not essentially be a shortage. So if this shortage is created to what effect? What do you think is going to happen now? Because yes, some voting stations are closing while others are remaining open. How is this chaos you're saying that is deliberately being created going to play out?
This shouldn't have happened because, as you rightly say, the Zimbabwe Election Commission went on the record to say everything was in order. But today, when the polling stations opened, we realized that everything is out of order, not in order. Now, you asked me a very interesting question. Why would they do this? This is meant to create an environment that is conducive for rigging. So a lot of Zimbabweans that came out today in the strongholds for the opposition would not have voted, and some of them have gone home. There are mothers who had little kids on their backs and had come to cast their vote. They cannot stay up to this time. It's 11 minutes past 8 right now in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. There is no way you can expect a mother with a breastfeeding baby to be waiting at a polling station for over 13, 14 hours. So these are votes that are going to be lost by the opposition because it is happening mainly in the opposition areas. The second aspect is that, as we saw in 2013, ZANU-PF has got a habit of busing in rural voters after they voted in rural areas, and they will come into these urban areas and cast votes again. We have tested the ink that is used to make sure that one does not vote again, and it's easily being washed away by domestos, which is a liquid that we use to clean our floors. So there's a huge plan. This is choreographed. It's not incompetence at all. The Zimbabwe Election Commission is run by a very smart woman. I know her personally. She's not an incompetent person. Her deputy is a former ambassador at the African Union. These are not fools. They know what they're doing, and the plan is to choreograph an election rigging, and that election rigging should look like there's a problem. There's no problem. They know what they're doing.
What is the potential for a call for a rerun? And some are already suggesting that this is exactly what should happen.
Well, this election does not meet any standard of a credible election, of a free and fair election. So in a normal society, this would require the election to be done again. But I don't think it's going to happen. ZANU-PF is not embarrassed by these things. They don't care what the world thinks. They just want to stay in power in order for them to continue looting public funds and plundering the country's natural resources. 95% of Zimbabwe's potential workforce is out of work. We have got the highest inflation in the world. Our schools don't have books. Our hospitals don't have medication. The whole of Zimbabwe does not have a single working cancer radiotherapy treatment machine. We don't have a single heart bypass machine. So the crisis is going to continue in Zimbabwe, and the crisis is going to continue in a way that is going to affect people in South Africa, in Namibia, in Botswana, where most Zimbabweans go. And it's important for the region to understand that rigged elections create problems that will be around for the next 5 years until the next election.
Yeah. Not that the Zimbabwean government would care what observers would pronounce at the end of this process anyway, but I'm just wondering, for example, that a situation that you are narrating of people's names being taken down and ID numbers and then being threatened to say, we'll check out the sequence of events, we'll know how you voted. Are these things happening in the eyes of observers? Are observers there when these things are happening? Do they see them?
Yes, they see them. And they've seen them for the past 23 years. But most of the key observers that met at SADC, African Union, have never bothered to address these issues. Some of them, like the ANC Secretary General Hopewell Chin'ono, have actually come before the election has been held and insulted the opposition leader as an American puppet. I know him personally. He's nowhere to be described as a puppet. In fact, his whole agenda is Afrocentric. So the fact that they're supporting each other as liberation movements or former liberation movements, it shows that they don't actually care about what happens in Zimbabwe. There's been a feeling for a long time that South African leaders actually prefer for the crisis in Zimbabwe to continue, because Zimbabwe has become a supermarket of South Africa where up to toothpicks and toilet paper is coming from South Africa. And that narration, which some of us used to dismiss, is now being taken seriously because of the behavior of the South African ruling party, ANC, and the kind of rhetoric that comes from its leadership.
To your point, the ZANU-PF is not being embarrassed at all by this because it is a choreographed situation. What's been the degree of communication from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission?
Well, they put out a statement today where they said that the delays in bringing election material, that is ballot papers, has been caused by ongoing litigation that has been taking place in Zimbabwe. But it doesn't hold water because the litigation has been the only litigation areas have been the presidential and one issue in Bulawayo, which involved members of parliament. But presidential ballots are not the issue. In most cases, you don't have local government, which is council ballot papers. They were never in courts for litigation. So that falls away. That is why I'm saying that this is a choreographed exercise to make it look that like the Zimbabwe Election Commission is incompetent, like it has failed. But that's not the case. They know what they're doing. The idea is to rig the election, and they know that SADC and the African Union are going to come and endorse, and then it will be another 5 years of suffering for Zimbabweans and another 5 years of South Africans shouting at Zimbabweans to go back to their country.
Hopewell Chin'ono, I appreciate your time watching that very carefully, and of course your reporting that you're continuing to do. We will now and again call on you to give us an update of what's happening there. Much appreciated. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Veteran journalist Hopewell Chin'ono has been observing the situation there on the ground, some worrying delays, which he calls strategic manipulation of the electoral process to make the environment rife for the rigging of these elections. We'll see what pans out in the end.